Bonjour mes amis, and welcome to Paris, the capital of this amazing country of France. Today we are doing our What's Going On video here in France. We're talking specifically modern France. So this is not the video about history, this is not the video about tourist stuff, what you can do in Paris as a tourist. This is not the video for you. What we're talking about is modern France, what's going on with the politics, what's going on with the people, what's going on with COVID, and all of that good stuff. So if you'd like to hear about life here in the centre de Paris, the center of Paris, come along, allez-y. Paris, Paris, Paris. On a personal note, guys, I actually lived in Paris for about 9 months. I went to a university here, dropped out, then moved on to something else, something different. But I had an apartment in the city. It was very cool, and it's always weird to be back. Like, walking the streets here in Paris is always so incredible. Even this is, you know, a very random part of Paris. This is the northwestern part of the city, the 17e, the 17th arrondissement or district. You know, you still get these really nice buildings with their iron. You get the kind of this 1920s, late 1800s style. And then in this part, because it's less in the center, it's very mixed. So you get a lot of different people living here, opening restaurants, opening stores, and so you get a lot of mix. You get lots of Indians, lots of Francophone Africans, you get lots of Arabs, people from the north of the Maghreb, so Moroccans, Algerians. So it's a really nice mix, and I think that's what makes Paris so interesting, but also so complex. So what's going on here? Let's get into it. When I always tell people that I lived in Paris, people always go, oh, how was it? Was it romantic? Was it, you know, this kind of mystical storybook, storyland kind of place, you know, the little shops, the cafes, the accordion music, the blah, blah, blah. In a lot of ways, Paris is that in the center, the old tourist center. But of course, what you get there is a lot of tourists, and it feels very different when you have a group of Chinese tourists sitting next to you as opposed to, you know, the quiet Parisian cafe where everyone's local. My first point about France and what's going on here is that it is extremely diverse, and the story of France has become extremely complicated as so many people have come to France over the last 50 years. The identity of the larger cities of France, Lyon, Paris, Marseille in the south, are really about the immigrants. And so while you can find lots of typical Parisian lifestyles happening or typical French lifestyles happening in Lyon, the overall feel and vibe of the city has completely changed as people from, again, the African region, the North African region, and the Middle East have moved here in large groups. You can go to entire parts of Paris and hear very little French spoken. Maybe you'll hear Wolof spoken by the Senegalese, maybe you'll hear Somali, maybe you'll hear Arabic, maybe you'll hear Turkish. The vast majority of immigration, of course, happens here in Paris, and there's entire districts, especially by Gare du Nord, Gare de l'Est, these kind of northeastern parts of Paris, where you would struggle to find people who of course everyone here is French and they speak French and blah, 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 but what you would find is the typical French European, the white guy. And so I think when people come here, that's not really what they're expecting. And it makes for a very vibrant place, but for a place with a lot of political instability because of this. We were just walking through the streets, and there was a big march going on of workers from Africa who were undocumented. And so a big problem here in France specifically is, since people immigrate from so many places, both legally and illegally, and because the EU has been dealing with this refugee crisis, this economic migration crisis from Africa, compounded with the Syrian refugee crisis and the Afghanistan refugee crisis, means you have a lot of people who have made it to France searching for better access to money, a better access for a place to live, and of course for a job to send money back home. And it leaves a lot of people slipping through the cracks. So the problem is the labor market here is incredibly complicated because you have so many, we can call them undocumented workers, and of course, because France is a very socialized state, it leaves some people in the margins, because if you report that you're here, you could be deported, and so obviously you don't want that. And secondarily, if you don't report that you're here, you're not able to access the services and everything like that. So France specifically with regards to immigration is tough because many people want to come to specifically France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and France seems to have a little bit more of an open door policy than some of the other countries I mentioned. the refugee crisis and the immigration issue here in France has directly affected politics, and especially the rise of the, we can call it the far right or the nationalist right. So currently people in France are kind of worried about the rise of nationalism. They saw it in the election before Macron, the current president, was elected, in which a politician named Marine Le Pen, whose father was a very far right nationalist party leader. There's a party here called the Front National, the National Front, and they are, you know, the more typical populist party that you have in Europe, and you see these popping up all around Europe as well. This isn't just happening in France. This nationalist movement here in France doesn't stop with Marine Le Pen, who of course is quite right-wing, but now there's a new figure in French politics named Éric Zemmour, and he is a hyper-nationalist, many people would call him, in that he has a very particular idea of what the future of France looks like, of course putting French nationals, white French nationals first. This is happening all over Europe, and this is kind of an interesting time for the EU in general, as we see this happening in Hungary and Poland, in the Eastern Bloc EU countries, and of course even in Germany with the Alternative für Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany. It's another kind of nationalist party which is kind of bolstered by the fact that there's a lot of immigration from Turkey and from other parts of the world into Germany. This is happening here in France as well. And so when we're looking at the politics with regards to immigration, it's really interesting to see what will happen. So there has been a trend that percentage points have been increasing towards people voting for nationalist parties, but the majority of French, what they proved with when they elected Macron, and a majority of Germans when they elected the new leader who replaced Angela Merkel, says that people are still for an open EU and for open immigration to the European Union. So while I think immigration is great, and I think people from all over the world coming and sharing their culture is awesome, if it's done without sort of assimilating to certain values, I think it puts a lot of pressure on the local people to vote for nationalist parties. So I'm very curious to see what's going to happen in the EU, and I think this decade we will definitely come to a head for positive or for the negative. We'll see. Changing topics, now we're going to focus on COVID and what COVID's like in France. So first of all, I always think it's incredibly hard when you're living in a city that's so densely populated like Paris. Paris is about 5 million people in a very, very, very densely populated area. You can think of, you know, everywhere you walk, houses and houses and houses, people and people and people, is that many people here in France were locked down for a very long time, as the French government was very strong against COVID, you know, agreeing with many policies that, of course, were also popular in the modern EU state. The students raised concerns of the low standards of living with the French government, as well as the issue with depression and suicide, which of course came with COVID in almost every country with significant lockdowns. And honestly, not a lot was done to help them. So of course, like, they've lifted the restrictions. Now if you travel to France, you need a QR code. You need to be vaccinated basically to do anything here. You can of course get a PCR test every 3 days if you want to go that route. The whole thing's very, very inconvenient, and they do the COVID pass port kind of situation in almost every EU country now, which I'm not a big fan of myself. I don't know, you guys can comment below whatever you think about that. I don't think it's right, but you got to do it. So if you do want to come to France, it is something that you certainly need to know, and you need to have something ready to be checked by basically any cafe, any restaurant, any museum, any government office, any store. They can ask you for your COVID passport. So COVID hopefully will get better here over time. At least people are out and about and doing their thing. But they had a really rough patch there for about 6 months. So hopefully no more lockdowns. Cross your fingers. So as we always answer, is France safe? Well, the answer is complicated. I would say that if you ask the majority of French people, they would say Paris is probably maybe the least safe city. Probably Marseille actually would be the least safe city, with Paris being the next one. I think every French person agrees that the country is getting less safe and less safe every year. Seems to be a trend in the majority of Europe and in the United States. So we can make that what it is. But walking around, of course, is pretty safe. In some areas in Paris at night, maybe not the safest. If you go to a small village, of course, it's quite safe. So it really depends where you are in France, but the bigger cities, not great. Marseille is notoriously the worst one. To note also, in the bigger cities, pickpocketing is a huge problem. Many people get pickpocketed, locals and tourists alike. Theft, common. So it's basically like if you come to any large city in the world, you should kind of keep your head on a swivel. So that's also important. The secondary issue here in France is, of course, terrorism, as many people from France and Francophone Belgium left the country to go join ISIS. And of course in 2015 and 2013 they had very bad terror attacks here in France, which were not good. Now, I wouldn't say the threat of terrorism should prevent you from going to any location. Of course, it happens, but it happens anywhere at any time, and you gotta just play your odds. So I wouldn't say you should stop your trip to France because you're afraid of terrorism. But it is, of course, something to be aware of, and the French police have been very diligent of dealing with the threat, and they've got lots of security everywhere now at all of the monuments, at all of the major walking streets there. You'll see police with big security, some riot shields, all that good stuff. The next question we always answer is it cheap? And the long and short answer is absolutely not. France is incredibly not cheap. Paris is incredibly not cheap, particularly for housing. So if you want to live here, very, very expensive. But even things such as food, clothing, and all the things that go with that, it's quite expensive here in France. Luckily, the minimum wage here in France is okay. So if you have a job here, you'll be able to afford, you know, like a reasonable quality of life, although it's hard. But in France, people have figured out, just like in the US, good ways to save money. And if you're a student here, you can save a lot of money because lots of things are free for students, lots of things are discounted for students, so that's good. And also the French state gives away a lot of free money to people in need. So those that do need it can get it if you're willing to wait to process the bureaucracy of it all. If you're planning to come as a tourist, however, very expensive. If you come to Paris or you come to any French city, try to avoid eating in the city center if you want to save money, because a coffee in this part of the city could be like 2 or 3 euros, but if you go to the city center, it could be like 7 euros. You can just assume you're paying double or triple the value of what it really should be, because there's so many tourists that come to France. It's the #1 touristed country on the planet, and Paris is the most touristed country on the planet as well. You should know that there are not a lot of deals for tourists. They want to take as much money from you as they can. So how do they do that? They overcharge you for basically everything. And typically, you know, if you're getting an Airbnb or a hotel, you're looking at least 100 euros a night for kind of the worst case scenario. A lot of people, you know, they spend maybe 250, 300 euros a night for a decent hotel in Paris, in Marseille. So that's just the reality of France. The one thing here that really gets me is the beer price. Super, super expensive. Unbelievably expensive, actually. It's like 9 euros for a really bad beer. I detest it. Finishing on a, of course, more positive note, because I do love this country. I'm on the Butte de Sacré-Cœur. This is a beautiful church here in the north of Paris, and you get one of the best views of the city. This region is called Montmartre, and you can see the entirety of Paris from up here. You can see the Notre Dame, you can see the Montparnasse Tower, which is the only skyscraper in the city center of Paris, and if you look this way, you'll see the Eiffel Tower. The story of modern France is, of course, complicated, beautiful, tragic, and everything in between. A lot of good times, a lot of bad times, a lot of happiness, a lot of misery. It's just what it is in any sort of modern country in the world. So I hope you guys learned something new. I hope you do visit France. It's one of the most unique and historic countries you can go to. You can walk in the footsteps of Napoleon. You can walk in the footsteps of some of the greatest writers. You can sit at cafes where Salvador Dali was, you know, drinking with Ernest Hemingway. It's just incredible that cities like this exist and countries like this exist. You can find some of the world's best food here. I mean, wine caves, cheese caves, some of the best dried cured meats that you can find, charcuterie, ooh la la. That's what I like. And if you do come to France, learning a little French will go a long way, because the French are not the biggest fans of speaking the old Anglais, the old English. So pick up a few words and don't be a typical tourist, you know. Go outside the city center and go grab a mint tea at a Moroccan cafe, or some African food in one of the outside of the city center. It's a unique experience that I have to recommend, along with any nice tour of the Notre Dame or the Eiffel Tower. So if you like the video, make sure to, of course, like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. That always helps me out. If you found this video interesting, make sure to comment below, say some cool stuff. This is one of my favorite places in the world. Super happy to be here. It was a quick stop in France, and our next video will be coming to you from Morocco. We're heading to Tangier in the north. So of course, thank you guys for watching, and bonne soirée from Paris.
Nee, maar dat doen we niet zoveel foto's van.